Welcome to the Innovation by Design podcast. And today we are exploring how design thinking drives innovation across the AEC industries. And my name is Evan Troxel, and I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Candace Kitchen. Candace, what's new?
I'm so excited for today. I think this is going to be a great conversation. Appreciate it. Today we have joining us Amy Baker with Amy Baker Architect. She's really helped to truly shape the design industry. So pretty excited for you to hear her story today. So with that being said, Amy, can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. So, I think when it comes to my story and finding my way through the profession and kind of where I am right now, I'll say that my journey has been a lot of things that I wouldn't have expected, even just getting into the profession as a starting point. I came into it as a high schooler who had no idea that architecture was a thing that I could do. And I just sort of fell into it at some really timely advice from a guidance counselor and a math teacher in high school. So my whole journey is just what I would say is trial and error. From there, I got into architecture school and kind of knew that I was more interested in or gravitated towards the more technical parts of the profession, meaning I was not the student that stayed up all night slaving over a design studio project. I had my projects done on time. I never pulled an all-nighter. I still have never pulled an all-nighter, and I'm really happy to say that. So I was really often kind of drawn to the technical classes more than the design studios, and I wasn't sure what that meant because in architecture school we kind of applaud all things related to design, and I'm not sure we celebrate the technical parts of the profession as openly as we do the design parts. So when I landed in my first job in an office, I was, pretty commonly doing things that intern architects do. And I was learning how to detail. I was learning how to put a set of construction documents together. But what's a little different about my story is that I was also writing specifications. And I wasn't doing it on big or complicated projects. I was given sort of what I'll call like baby specification tasks and kind of compiling project manuals and making simple edits, learning kind of the lay of the land. And these things I was doing right after I graduated. So that fear factor I had in accessing and kind of reading specifications was sort of eliminated right out of the gate because I was lucky enough to be exposed to that. Um, so I think that's kind of what set the stage for what was eventually to come in being kind of an internal specification writer and architect who was more specialized on the technical and code side. And then eventually I decided to kind of go out on my own and start a firm that focuses on these qualities, these interests of mine. And weirdly, we don't even offer design services as a kind of marketing strategy in my firm.
I can't tell you how many architects, and I know I've thought this. I don't know if I've ever said it out loud. So this isn't my words. I'm here. This is going to be other people's words. I never, ever, ever want to have to write a spec. I've heard many people. I never want. And what's really cool is there are people like you who are just totally wired for that, and it isn't this thing that you dread doing. It's this thing that you love doing. And I'm just curious, like, why do you think you were drawn to that? You had a lot of schooling before architecture school. You had
Right.
including architecture school before you got into working in a firm. And then it was like, that was the part that clicked. So what do you think that is in your wiring that helps you, be the thing for you?
I think it goes back to really appreciating architecture as a very tactile, real thing. So
Mm,
I realized and have always kind of known just from, being kind of a handy kid, I would always help out with projects that my dad was working on. I was always building and making things. And the specifications part of it is describing actual materials that are made by people or are natural materials, and they're fabricated with tools and resources and things that exist in this world today. And if we can't sort of get to the point in specification writing where we can describe that, like a real
mm,
material that's available to procure and fabricate and, eventually install in a building for some realistic purpose, then we haven't really fully done our job in writing a specification. We're making these like beautiful design ideas come to some reality. The sort of side of the profession that I really appreciate, which is the side I don't say I have a particularly, high or comfortable level of, interest in, or is honestly in that sort of like creative thinking design side, where we're kind of envisioning what the building wants to look like, what it wants to take form as, how it needs to function. And that whole creative part of the profession is a part that doesn't exist in my brain. Like I need to operate on the sort of constraints side. Okay, but what is that material? How does it get installed? How do we procure it? How is it fabricated? So I think it's really coming down to kind of like the realism in architecture and being able to translate those awesome ideas into something that really exists and we can experience.
It's super interesting. This is a left brain, right brain kind of dialogue right now, and you're right. Like a lot of schools, not every school is really weighted on one side of that equation. It's like design, design, design. And then like architecture doesn't count if it doesn't get built. I mean, that's my belief, right? So
Right.
you're on like the getting it built part, like the reality, the physical properties, the installation, like describing exactly what those parts of those components of buildings are, so that that design intent, that really creative process that is the early stages of design, gets built, right? It's like
That's right.
realizing design intent happens through this process of finer and finer grain. And, construction documents are actually drawings and specifications, right? And a lot of people ignore the specifications part of it when they're thinking about construction documents, because they're thinking construction
Right.
drawings. And so, I mean, it is like it's both sides of the same coin, and you need to have both, and they both have equal weight when it comes to the contract documents, right? So it's really interesting to me how much the industry focuses on one side of that, and it starts in school, right? It absolutely starts in school. And so like when you went through that education process and you started to realize like, okay, this part, no, but this part, yes, and the focus is not on the part that you're saying yes to. How did that work over those 5 years or however many years it took you to get through that degree?
So I think that when I graduated, I didn't realize that I was fully on the technical side. I knew that I was most interested in it, but I didn't realize that that would be my very deliberate career choice.
Mm.
I think only after I had a few years under my belt working at, professional offices as an intern architect, and then sort of like gaining experience, did I realize that my path might look a little bit different than my peers, who were in a lot of cases way more interested in design. So the big hurdle is when it came, I've started my practice, we're 7 years in, and no one tells an architect who was practicing for 15 years at that time that you can start a firm and not offer design services as kind of a core service. And that is exactly what I did. And there was no looking back for me. It was kind of like, well, I think, based on working within offices, being kind of an internal resource in a lot of ways for my coworkers and peers, I think that this is a service that I can sort of stand on and have it be the primary service we provide. We are a specifications writing consultant to other firms, but we also do still practice architecture. And it just sort of ended up being the natural path, the only one that made sense for me. But, nobody tells you can do that. Everybody sort of expects that somebody who goes out on their own is going to definitely offer design as a core service. But I can say for sure there's a need for people like me, even those who want to open their own firm, I think.
Yeah, and that's so true. I mean, you mentioned earlier about trial and error early on in your life. And then you think to now you have a totally different business model than a lot of firms out there, and that trial and error to make sure that you're going to market the way you want to. So I imagine that played a large role into the decision making for how you want to go to market and how you want to reach out to all of these other firms because you are a consultant. So can you speak to the trial and error of that?
Yeah. So within firms, and I was working, at various scales of firms through my 15 years, being employed in an architectural office. And some of those were big kind of global firms, and others were smaller firms where we just had architects in house, no engineering. But one thing I knew to be true in my case is that I was not the project manager person or the client facing person or the business development person. I was the person behind the scenes, like checking the codes, writing the specs, doing the details, and kind of like figuring out, again, that reality piece. How does somebody actually build this? So the other major hurdle for me was how do I even go out there and say, hey, I'm starting a firm. I'm not offering design, but like maybe somebody that needs the things that I'm offering, and I don't know, spread the good word. So what's really weird is I had such amazing support from my peers and past coworkers basically the minute I announced that I was doing this.
Nice.
And I think all of those years of, offering whatever help I could to my coworkers with those technical things, especially code and spec related things. And just because I'm interested in detailing, I did a lot of QC checking. I think that built a lot of trust and goodwill where it made it, so that all of these people who are now dispersed in my market at lots of different firms, like if a need came up somewhere, either because maybe that firm was too big to take on a small project or because that particular firm didn't have a spec writer and needed that kind of support, everybody was so gracious about throwing my name out there. And I honestly didn't have to do a whole lot of marketing at all besides tell my own network what was happening and that I was available to do the kinds of things that they knew about me and knew that I had been doing internally when we were working together.
There's a lot of technology that's out there that's marketed as like, we'll take away this part so that you can focus on the part that you love, right? And that's what you sound like, Amy, right? You're like, you are a technology. Your firm is a technology that allows people to focus on the part that they want to focus on because you're going to take care of the stuff that they maybe don't. And so, that just sounds really cool. And you answered a question that I was going to ask, which was you said you're not the client facing, the marketing forward, and your network kind of helped handle that for you because
Yes,
you've
it
built a
did.
reputation. It kind of speaks to the value of a network, right? And I'm curious where you're building your network because I've read through your bio and I kind of know the answer to this a little bit already, but you're really involved in the conference side of that industry, and I imagine that's maybe where your network is built. And so maybe you can even speak to the value of doing that. Because I bet even that at some level you have to get a little bit outside your comfort zone to do
Oh,
that.
definitely. So when I went out on my own, my network was my group of peers and past coworkers.
Hmm.
But I think in the bio, the stuff that you're probably, referencing would be my involvement in a lot of professional organizations.
Right.
And what's weird is that happened after the fact. I wasn't really engaged in all of the professional organizations I currently am until after I started my business. So my network was very organic when I started this 7 years ago, and it truly was through the referrals and introductions of my past coworkers that got it off the ground and up and running. Um, since then, I have spent a lot of time volunteering for numerous. I'm a little bit chronically overcommitted to volunteering on professional boards and organizations, but it's because I really value their missions, and I think that education in this profession is really important. So to me, it's totally worth it. That's why I got involved, is mostly because I appreciate being a technical person, that education is pretty fundamental in
Hmm.
making all things technical possible for architects in practice. What I didn't realize, again, because I'm not a very business minded business development minded person, maybe, is that these connections that I would make through these professional organizations just kind of amplified my visibility and reach, I think. And I have, through volunteering on various boards, made connections who in some way became a project or work that my firm has taken on. So absolutely, in the last 7 years, these connections have grown my business. But I didn't actually start volunteering for most of them until after I started it.
Unforeseen opportunities, I think, is something that comes out of that type of work. And could you talk a little bit maybe about, like, I'm sure you didn't go into those thinking, oh, this is networking and the networking is
Not
going
at
to
all.
lead to, and so maybe like what are the kinds of things that you didn't see that have happened because of the volunteering and the contributions that you've been making to these different organizations?
So I didn't realize that through some of the organizations, I've been invited to participate in some really cool stuff. Like on the software side, I know this is not quite the same as like I'll just tell you who I'm volunteering for.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm on boards for CSI in my local chapter, the Building Enclosure Council, the local chapter, for the Air Barrier Association of America, and also for SCIP, which is Specifications, Consultants, and Independent Practice. But I'm also
The only acronym you didn't say what was CSI, the first one. So can you just, so for those who don't
yes,
know,
for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the Construction Specifications Institute. So through those professional organizations, each of which have kind of a different target group in terms of the cross section of membership. Honestly, all of them have resulted in some kind of connection that either resulted in a request for proposal in some fashion, which became an actual job that the firm has taken on, or it's become, especially in the case of SCIP, the Specifications Consultants Organization. I've gotten to know so many amazing other consultants who are doing this very niche thing that I'm doing. We're all, independent, but there's some form of togetherness when you kind of connect with these people because, they're dealing with the same things I'm dealing with as a business owner, meaning like, how are we preparing contracts? How are we dealing with schedule changes? How are we dealing with staffing, training, QC checking? So that organization has been great in a really different way, where I can kind of relate to people that are going through the same things. But I would say through all of them, there's definitely been unintended benefits. Not the reason I started participating in them, but certainly things that have bettered my profession or my professional, experience or the work that we're doing, or kind of broadened our skill sets and our tools to be able to operate our business.
Yeah, and then your involvement too, I know because I've seen it. You've gotten quite a few speaking opportunities as well. And I think that's really implored you to be able to educate, which sounds like is pretty important to what you believe we need in the industry. And I know even within your own firm, you do a lot of education as well. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So I will be really transparent and say that I hate public speaking.
I like how you
Uh,
kind of look to the side. You're like,
it's
who's listening?
just terrible. It's like, yeah, I am trying really hard to come out of my shell, both in being, a business owner, a business development person. Those are definitely things that have to happen. And I've also added public speaking to that list, which is really difficult for me. In fact, like I was really nervous leading up to this conversation. I'm fine now, but
Good.
stuff like this is really kind of like pulling me outside of my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to sort of keep challenging myself to do that because I know that it is the fuel that keeps things going, and it sort of increases our visibility so that we can connect with firms that maybe haven't heard of us. The public speaking part it's been a fun adventure. It's always terrifying, but then afterwards, I feel like I've conquered something.
Nice.
And I found that if it's a topic that I can just sort of casually speak on versus like having to do a deep dive research effort for. It's much more comfortable for me because it's just, stuff I know, stuff I'm comfortable with. But if it's more like a research this and then talk about it scenario, I wouldn't do so well.
The output for that kind of work for you is in drawings and specifications, right? It's like you're happy to research and put it into writing and cross-referencing
Sure.
and all that side, but speaking about it is another thing entirely. It's
Absolutely.
interesting to me to think about like just the innovation behind your business model and the niche that you're serving, right? And so I'm curious what you think, because maybe you've even seen other opportunities, maybe for you, maybe not for you though. Like you said, there's kind of this standard way about, designing a practice. And then you have kind of gone parallel to that in a different lane. There's other lanes too, right? And so I'm just curious, like if you were talking to somebody else who's maybe they're doing something similar to what you're doing in a firm, or maybe not, maybe they're doing another lane on the highway, right? What would you tell them? Because you got over that fear to do the thing. And I'm just curious how you would encourage others to do something similar.
I think that it really was important for me to stick to my roots and like be very clear about what I was doing when I started this, meaning have a clear sense of self, identity, a clear sense of the services that I wanted to offer. And that's not ever really changed in the last 7 years. I've not sort of masqueraded and said, we're a design firm, we can do your book. Like that's never been a part of my pitch. So I think just sort of believing that niche thing that you're offering is the kind of work you want to do, in your business, and just being really clear that these are the things that we're great at. And if the services you require, aren't what we're doing, then maybe we're not the best fit. There's been a handful of times when I've had to say, I think what you're describing is more of a design effort. Why don't I connect you with somebody that I know does, great work in that realm? And then if you need me on the back end of that to start figuring out how to build it or how to make it code compliant or how to specify it, then we'll come back and talk about it. But being able to say like, this is definitely in my lane versus this is something that somebody else should be able to help you with, has really made a difference, and just being really clear about what we're doing.
Candace, I wanna ask you a question, because I think that what you do at Total Door is you interface with people like Amy on a much higher frequency than maybe others in the profession. And so I'm curious, in that type of a relationship, what can you guys both maybe tell us about that technical side? There's a real the boots on the ground, like this stuff has to work, because you're also then interfacing on the construction side of things where installation is happening and problems need to be solved on a daily basis. So Candace, maybe you kick this off and just kind of talk about that side of, or that phase of projects in architecture.
Yeah, I think what's been really great for me is just asking the questions, because what Amy alluded to with, just being honest is huge, but you can't be honest when you don't have all the details. And so having all those details right from the start, even the stuff you don't think you need to tell us anyways, because it might matter. It might matter when we're writing the specification. It might matter down the line when you're doing the install, but it could make a difference. And having that information up front, being able to then say, this is in my lane or this is not in our lane. And then that's how you build that network and keep those relationships, because if you're not in the right lane, if you're not going with the right company, or you're not talking about the right thing, then you can use your other network and say, hey, this is a great alternative. I know who I can lead you to. So details is what I would say to that. It can only help in every single position that you might be in the project. And I think that Amy spoke to that really well when she said, I know my lane, I'll stay in it. And I'll do a good job. in that lane.
And those are the things too that specifiers appreciate about building product manufacturers. Like we don't want to hear just an empty sales pitch. We want somebody that's going to, you know, allow us to stay out of trouble because of their expert knowledge of that product and all of the ways that it needs to be set up to be successful. So like when I'm working with product manufacturers, it's actually the most trusted people are those that can tell me straight if that's a good application for that product, because at the heart of that, they want their product to succeed in that application. So if it's just not a good fit, then, I would need to hear that or understand that. So I think just being really honest and getting to the point goes a long ways.
Candace knows this about me. It's one of the things that I really value, and it touches on exactly what you just said, was you want to go to somebody who obviously they know way more about their thing than you will ever know about their thing, because that's their business, and you as an architect are orchestrating thousands of building components and assemblies and the way everything goes together to the detail so that it meets that design intent. The thing that Candace knows is like being a category expert, not just a specific product expert, is so important because of that recommendation to if it's not the fit, like help me get to where I need to go. I'm curious what your experience is in the industry in that regard, Amy. Like, do you see that more and more, or do you not see that enough?
I don't know if this answers your question, but I see that like buildings are getting more and more complicated because we're doing things that didn't exist, hundreds of years ago, meaning like we're talking about building airtightness, and there's products that accomplish this. But when we do that, there's other consequences that then need to be balanced with other systems. So like the interconnectedness is where things can really go sideways. And we as specifiers and technical architects rely heavily on building product manufacturers experiences. Like here's how this application succeeds. Here are things you need to look out for in which it might fail. So I think that there's no specifier, at least I don't think, that would say I am the expert in all of these hundreds of materials that are included in any given project manual. We have to rely on manufacturers who really do understand their products and the best case scenarios for each application, and can kind of like support us, fill in the gaps, tell us what to look out for. There's just too much information to be coordinated. Even in prototype architecture, like where we have the same design, I'll say, that's like, it's an iterative thing, meaning like it's a one-off every time it's built. Even in those scenarios, it's still a unique property, a unique owner, perhaps, a unique set of trades, a unique set of individuals representing each of those trades. And it's sort of like that building's never really been built before, even if it is a prototype, because all of these circumstances are different every single time. So any building falls into that category, prototype or not. It's the only time that building is going to be built under those circumstances. So we have to be sort of on alert to allowing each of these things to come together in this chaotic way, in a way that it will work in the grand scheme of things. And that's really difficult. If you think about it, we've got, millions of bits and pieces in every building, and we're trusting this process to get us to the finish line so that all these little bits and pieces come together properly and the owner has what they want in their building. But it's got to be a partnership between all of the players, including the construction side.
I think you just expanded my definition of architecture, because I've said many times in the past, like every building's a prototype. And so you're right, though, every building that even gets site adapted to that's the same building, I'm using the podcasting air quotes when I say that it's not the same, right? The orientation is different, the site is different, the group of people is different. To all those aspects all the variables that you listed, it's absolutely true. And how many times, Amy, have you been out on a project where it's going up and you're just like, I can't believe they're actually doing this. Like, this started with a blank piece of paper in many circumstances. And
Right.
I can't believe it's real because you know behind the scenes everything that's happened to get to that point. And
Right.
it's kind of ridiculous how much work goes into creating the built environment. It's incredible to kind of really like sit back and think about that, because so many days of the week you're working on a little part of it and you compartmentalize and just like, okay, I can focus on this problem, I can solve this set of problems, I can talk to these people, okay, done. But then there's a million more of those waiting in line, right? And so at the end of that line, it's like, oh, here's the building. Wow, absolutely incredible that this actually happened. I can't believe it.
Yeah. Some of my favorite spec writing tasks lately um, are those where like I'll have a design rendering or something that's not fully worked out, and uh, our architect clients who are envisioning what it needs to look like or maybe function like
Mm-hmm.
have only kind of developed that idea at a very surface level. And when we get into the how do I describe this so that a contractor can understand what to build or bid, sometimes it leads me to the point where I'm talking to stone fabricators that are local to that project, meaning like we know it's a big stone thing,
Mm-hmm.
but we know that it can't be a solid stone thing because if it
Mm-hmm.
was, it wouldn't be able to be shipped and it would need a foundation, and those things are not likely to happen. So it's really cool to be able to be connected to the people that will eventually fabricate and build it and kind of write the specifications based on feedback from those people. So those are really the fun ones to me because I don't have a specification master for some of these crazy stone fabrications that I eventually have to specify.
Yeah.
But there's a whole figuring out period of like, okay, who's doing this and how do they ship that to the job site and how big of a piece
Yes.
and how heavy can it be, and
Logistics. Yeah. All of
logistics, all
those
of those
things.
things need to be
Mm-hmm.
discussed and thought about. So those are kind of the fun ones.
I'm curious how what your process is like, because many firms have an in-house spec writer, and usually the numbers of those people are very small, even in large firms, right? And so I imagine it's not too different, because it's not like those individuals are sitting at the table during the design process because they've got specs to write, they've got things to do, and they're probably overloaded. And so you're offering this as a third party service to firms. And so I'm curious what your process is like when you're engaging with a team, when you have a rendering, for example, of a building. What kinds of things do you go through? Is it just Q&A? Is it a work session where people are pulling out trays? I mean, I don't know if you go into offices or if you're doing it all remote. Just kind of talk through your process.
Sure. So your earlier point that people don't really enjoy writing specs is totally accurate. And mostly I find that people are kind of intimidated by it, or they just want to have somebody else do that on their behalf. Um, so what we tend to do and what I found to be more successful, like there's a couple of schools of thought. Sometimes specifiers have checklists, and that could be a really like high level checklist just to identify the sections, or it could be like, a 100-page packet of like, tell me about your drywall, and do you have abuse resistant drywall, and do you even know what
Mm-hmm.
that means, and so on and so
Mm-hmm.
on. I found that sort of like delegating a checklist task is not a great way to extract the kind of information I need. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing that's challenging now with technology changing is that Revit is sort of a world of placeholders until they're not, meaning we're building a model. And in order to have a form and start to develop these earlier phase documents, something has to be modeled. And that something likely isn't figured out in terms of its materiality at the time that it's modeled. So,
Absolutely.
as a specifier, it's impossible for me to know what in those drawings is being generated from a placeholder and which things have actually been decided and agreed upon. And that's now what the process is, especially when we're talking about BIM as the thing that's doing the modeling and drawing generation. So I found it to be more successful to try and extract material and specification information from our architect clients on a call where we're able to sort of interview them about where they're at in the process. Meaning, like, I'm seeing this storefront system and I can tell that it's based on this particular manufacturer, but is this actually what you want as a basis of design? Or is it a placeholder? Tell me where you're at. And we can usually, get down to what it actually is and where they're at in that decision making pretty quickly on a call, compared to making assumptions maybe that aren't correct about what's in that model and what's been solidified and what's still hanging out there. And I've just found that the sort of conversational side of spec writing is a more approachable and accessible way for them to give me feedback. Meaning, I don't want to give them a checklist and ask them 300 questions that they don't understand and have to research in order to answer. I would rather ask them a question and have them say, you know what, I'm not sure what that particular characteristic means with regards to this product. Can you tell me more about it? And then we'll chat about it. And if they can answer the question, then we'll move on. I think that because specification writing feels daunting and inaccessible to people, just kind of the tone of the conversation is really important when we're on these calls. It's a lot of nitty gritty information, and I would never want to intentionally make people feel like they're unable to answer questions. Like I'm still learning things every single day. There's no way I would expect that all of our clients would know the answer to all of these things.
So do you have them throw the model over to you and you inspect it kind of black box or completely blind to say, it's kind of like an initial QA, I think, in that regard? Or do you have them present to you what they've done so far? Because I could imagine there being value in that process because they can tell you why. I mean, this is one thing that gets lost in documentation all the time, even in the final product of an actual building. When somebody walks through, it's like, why is it like that? Oh, well, here are the reasons why it's like that. And we were solving this, and this is in response to this thing that we heard from this user, and et cetera, et cetera. There's a why behind a lot of that. I'm curious, like, do you do both of those things? Do you prefer one over the other?
We don't usually get into their BIM models directly, but we do ask for updates of like PDF sets of their drawings, just progress sets, even if it's not pulled together in a very complete form. Because at least then we can start to see the layout. We can start to see some elevations. We can ask questions about details that we know or anticipate will need to, come in later documentation, and we can start those conversations. So usually we are reviewing whatever form of documentation they have, and that always generates project specific and detail specific questions that we have, just so we're understanding. And that is honestly where we hear, well, here's why it's been decided that this is the detail, or this is the form, or this is the material. So I think those conversations just flow out of these discussions pretty organically. I'm not usually getting pitches like that a designer would pitch to an owner to talk about the project, like that kind of why we did it this way versus that way. I don't necessarily need to know in depth, but certainly when it comes to why did we decide on this material, why did we decide on this form, those kinds of things tend to come out organically.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many times where I've talked to a senior project architect who is detailing and doing code analysis and things like that, and they're kind of rolling their eyes like, oh, designers doing this, doing that. And of course, then it's like, well, here's why. Oh, and that story, I feel like bridges the gap between the eye rolling and the reality of where we are in the project, right? And so it's like, oh, that you're trying to do something. No, we're not trying to do something cool here. We're trying to like address this. And sometimes the answer is, yeah, we're trying to do something different here for sure. But it's interesting to kind of the team dynamics, even in an office that happen between these different roles, and it's like just there's a lot of psychology, there's a lot of personality, there's a lot going on during these projects that people who visit buildings just never ever see, and so it's always interesting to kind of see the timeline of these projects and how they play out.
Yeah, I think it's
Certainly.
really cool being in the middle of that. Honestly, like I consider myself to be, um, more on the how does somebody construct this side of
Hmm.
things. And when we do practice architecture, we are very much engaged in those conversations with our contractors and subcontractors.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's neat to be sort of in that middle space where I can understand as an architect who has designed things, like what the design professional is trying to come through with on, function, aesthetics, whatever it might be, efficiency. I can understand what they're saying, but I also can appreciate that somebody's got to interpret and build that later
Yes.
on. And I think that that's kind of like where where we shine and where I want to live in terms of the services we offer.
That's great too, because it kind of comes down to you don't know what you don't know. And when you have all these conversations, you kind of start to learn what you don't know. And then down the line, each project just gets better every single time. You start learning from both sides, like you said, and being that middleman provides a lot of room for where you can learn really easily. So I couldn't
Hmm.
agree more.
Amy, has there been anything like a problem that you've solved recently or a challenge that you've come up again that you felt was kind of a novel way to approach it? Or maybe just a favorite problem that you've had recently that you just thought was really cool that you were able to work on and solve?
So I think that there's a few different ways to answer that. Some of the fun stuff I've been working on more recently has actually been on the software side, and particularly on the specification writing software side. One of the other things I do in all of my spare time is participate in an advisory board for
You
a
forgot to
software
do the
company.
spare time, air quotes. Yeah,
Spare time.
like doesn't sound like you have
Yeah,
any of that.
not too much. But this one's really fun because we get to, or I get to influence how software is functioning for my betterment and hopefully betterment of other people that use the same software. Um, and I think that's really neat because whenever I see updates come through and it's kind of like, oh, there's one of mine and there's another
Yeah.
one that I asked
Mm.
for. And, you get to see kind of like behind the curtain of how the decisions are made to make the software function, hopefully in a better, more accurate, more efficient way. I get to sort of see that firsthand. And I think that's really cool. And we've definitely seen some big changes and improvements to the software that we're using as a result of participating on a board like that, which I think is awesome. But then there's like instances where we've used that software for specification writing for other types of documents,
Mm.
meaning I now use it for proposals. And it's not really intended for that use,
Hmm.
but the same functionality that I appreciate in using that software for specification writing is the kind of functionality I think I need in proposal writing as well. So I've sort of built up our own templates to now
Hmm.
include, things like that. And it saves me a whole bunch of time every time I'm going through the proposal writing process, which for spec writing is often because they're small projects. So I'm constantly writing proposals and we're constantly working on multiple
Mm.
projects. But it ended up saving a ton of time, kind of like thinking outside the box and using what was intended for one sole purpose, spec writing, using that for something else. So we're constantly looking at ways to do that on the software side, just to eliminate redundancy, improve efficiency, do things more regularly, accurately, consistently. that's happening all the time. But most recently, I would say that's been kind of one of my favorite unintended uses of a tool we already have.
That's
Um,
awesome. I would have never seen that answer coming, and so now I'm just curious if you could kind of elaborate on the spectrum of spec writing and how it happens, because you're talking about technology, software that is specifically developed to help write specs, but there are many people still doing it, the old-fashioned way. And this is across the board. It's not just spec writing, right? We see this in the practice of architecture too. And so, there's people who, still draw by hand. There's people who still draw in CAD. There's people who are doing BIM. So there's that spectrum. On the spec writing side, what does that look like?
so every person that maintains a library of spec masters is probably going to say they're not where I want them to be, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't have a lot of time when we're actively writing projects to also maintain a full library of office masters that are immaculate and perfect and wonderful. Some firms have that capacity, but most don't. So I'll say this to fully admit that our internal project masters are never perfect and they're always in a state of being improved. But I'm working through kind of what I would call our, most common sections that get issued on almost all of our projects. And I am linking them up so that instead of having to sort of manually incorporate specification articles and language line by line, I can do that with one singular edit, which, populates that specification with its necessary pieces based on, one click of the button instead of 14.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that that's not only great for efficiency, but it's actually going to improve our accuracy too. Because if you're hunting in a
Right.
document that's 20, 30 pages long for the 14 lines that pertain to fire resistance, you have a greater chance of missing one, and maybe you needed that one. So we're trying to improve our platform, our masters, to be more accurate through the use of tools that I'm currently building for our team.
Yeah, you're really streamlining it. I think you're going to have people knocking on your door for that.
It's not unlike BIM, right? It's like the idea with BIM was, okay, I move the window in one place and it updates everywhere, right? That's exactly what you're talking about in this is like BIM for spec writing, where it's like I update the master and it updates everywhere that is linked from in the various documents. And so it totally makes sense to just do it the smart way because it saves you so much time in the long run. But
Right.
in order to get the time to do that, like you have to intentionally work on your business because you're usually working on projects, which take all the time. And so it's difficult to find the time to work on the business. But if you can chip away at it project by project, it just, and constant continual improvement over time, then you're going to see real results from that.
And my goal this year and into next year, well, probably forever, honestly, but is to continue to make efforts to intentionally work on the business and balance that with working in the business.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still working on projects actively, but I have a team now also, and we all benefit when I can work on on the
Sure.
business itself. So that's sort of a bigger picture thing that I've been focusing on a lot more lately.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for talking with us today. I mean, maybe we'll just finish up with a final words of wisdom from Amy Baker, architect. I mean, if somebody else wanted to do the kind of thing that you've done, I would just be curious to hear what your encouragement would be for them, because I think a lot of times people think there's not a place for a different kind of business, or to really double down on your strengths and chase that and pursue that so into something as successful as what you've done. But you've definitely shown that it's totally possible. So what would you say to those people?
I would say, um, so I think we all as architects and professionals want to find that singular mentor who represents something that we are yet to achieve but are on a path towards, and like they model and embody all of those wonderful, great things. But for a person like myself who maybe doesn't fit the mold so perfectly, I think it's okay to realize that there are a lot of mentors and people around you that are even, at your same level of experience that have great skill sets that you can appreciate and learn from. And, I still want to find that singular person, but I also appreciate that along my journey, there's been so many people that have kind of filled these gaps and kind of informed who I want to be as a professional and as an architect. And collectively, it's okay that I don't have one person that I can kind of model my career after, as long as I surround myself with people that can kind of like inform me in the ways that like interest me and, you know, bring passion to my professional experience. So I think that would maybe be the biggest piece of advice, is not to kind of like limit yourself in looking for that one source of truth,
Mhm.
but rather to kind of appreciate that you can get that still. It just might come from multiple places, and to surround yourself with people that are on board with that.
So many great insights shared today. Thank you so much. I'm going to put links to everything in the show notes that we can possibly put in there to allow our listeners to knock on Amy's door, connect with her online, find out more about the organizations that she's linked up with and software companies, everything, specifications. And so, Amy, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. It's been great.
Thank you,
Thank you
Amy.
for having me. It's been a lot of fun.